Hello there, and a very warm, quiet welcome to you. You've found your way to this gentle corner of the night, and I'm so glad you're here. Perhaps you're what some might call a midnight detective, someone whose curiosity doesn't quite dim with the daylight. Or maybe you're simply seeking a soft voice in the stillness, a calming current to help guide your thoughts towards the peaceful shores of sleep. Whatever has brought you here, I hope you find a little comfort, a little soothing companionship in our shared time. Tonight we're going to embark on a journey together. Not a jarring or unsettling one, I promise. Instead, it's a gentle, curiosity-soothing exploration. We'll be softly turning the pages of one of the modern world's most profound and lingering mysteries. A story that many of us have heard. A question that has whispered itself across the globe. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Now, before we take even our first step into this story, it feels incredibly important to pause, to breathe, and to acknowledge something with deep sincerity. Our hearts, our quiet thoughts, go out to every single person whose life was touched and irrevocably changed by what happened. The passengers who were on that flight, the dedicated crew, and all their families, their friends, their loved ones. Their loss is immeasurable. Their pain a heavy shadow. So, as we explore these questions tonight, please know it's done with the deepest, most profound respect for them. We're not here to startle or to sensationalize. We're here to gently ponder, to quietly wonder about the things that still linger in the silence of the night, those questions that bubble up when the world around us is hushed. This is a safe space for that wondering, for that quiet contemplation as we sift ever so softly through what is known and what remains so stubbornly, deeply unknown. We aim for a journey that respects the gravity of the event while trying to understand the fog of uncertainty that still surrounds it. It's like tracing the outline of a distant mountain range in the twilight. We may not see every peak and valley clearly, but we can appreciate its shape and its mystery. Imagine, if you will, a vast, dark canvas. The kind of deep, velvety black you only see far away from city lights, where the stars feel close enough to touch. Now, picture tiny, distant lights, like scattered diamonds, winking slowly, methodically. These are the lights of an airport at night. They blink on runways, along taxiways, atop control towers, each one a tiny point of reference in the immense darkness. There's a low hum, almost a sigh, the sound of powerful engines idling down, or perhaps, far off, the sound of one taking to the skies, a rumble that fades into the night. It's a place of transition, of journeys beginning and ending. And from this place, a modern marvel of engineering, a Boeing 777, a huge, gleaming aircraft designed to carry hundreds of people safely across continents and oceans, prepared for its flight. It was filled with lives, each one a unique story, a collection of hopes, dreams, plans, and destinations. And then it climbed into that inky sky, rose above those winking lights, and simply vanished. It didn't crash in a way that was immediately obvious. It didn't send out a final, desperate call. It just dissolved. It slipped away from the bright, clear lines of radar screens, from the reassuring cadence of radio contact, and flew into a realm of profound silence, leaving behind not answers, but a growing cloud of whispers, questions, and a deep, aching void. This was Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, March 8th, 2014. A date that now resonates with a particular kind of sorrow and bewilderment. 239 souls on board, expecting to arrive in Beijing, but instead they became part of one of aviation's most perplexing modern riddles. What happened in those unseen hours, in that unlit part of the sky? Where did this massive, sophisticated aircraft truly go? These are the questions that hang in the air, heavy and unresolved. Questions that, like certain stars, only become fully visible when the noise of the day fades and the quiet of the night allows for deeper reflection. We won't find all the answers here tonight. They remain stubbornly out of reach, perhaps hidden in the deepest, darkest corners of the ocean. But perhaps, just perhaps, we can find a measure of quiet understanding, a sort of peaceful companionship with the mystery itself by exploring its contours, understanding the immense efforts made to find it, and acknowledging that very human need we all have to seek meaning, especially when faced with such a profound and echoing silence. So, let your breath continue its slow, steady rhythm. Let your mind be open and gentle. Let us explore softly together. It's a strange thing, this business of vanishing, isn't it? It happens in small ways in our lives, ways that can be frustrating or even a little unsettling long before we encounter mysteries on such a global scale. Think about that favourite pair of socks. You know the ones, perfectly comfortable, your go-to pair. You're sure you put both of them in the laundry or folded them neatly in a drawer. But then one day one of them is simply gone. Its partner sits there, a lonely reminder, and you search and search. But it's as if one sock has stepped into another dimension, a tiny, personal Bermuda Triangle in your own home. It's a small thing, of course, but it leaves a little niggle, a sense of something incomplete. Or what about your house keys? You walked in the door, you're almost certain you put them in that little bowl on the table or on the hook by the door, just like you always do, but when it's time to leave again, they're nowhere to be found. Your pockets are empty, your bag yields nothing. That little jolt of panic, the frantic retracing of steps, the increasingly desperate search. Where could they have possibly gone? It feels like the laws of physics have momentarily bent around your keys, hiding them in plain sight or whisking them away entirely. Usually they turn up under a cushion, in a coat pocket from yesterday, somewhere ridiculously obvious. But for those few minutes, that small object takes on enormous importance. And in our digital age, there are new kinds of vanishings. An important email, carefully composed, double-checked and sent off with a click. You expect a reply or at least an acknowledgement. But days go by and there's nothing. Did it get lost in cyberspace? Is it sitting in their spam folder unseen? Or did it simply evaporate into the digital ether? It's a modern kind of limbo, that uncertainty of whether your message, your thought, your effort ever even arrived, or a text message to a friend filled with exciting news or a heartfelt question. You see the little sent icon, but the delivered or read receipt never appears. It just hangs there, a one-sided conversation, a whisper into the void. These little daily disappearances, they create a tiny echo of that larger feeling. The bewilderment of something present becoming suddenly absent. We humans are wired to expect continuity, for things to follow a logical path. When they don't, it throws us off balance. I remember one time, many years ago, I was at an airport very, very early in the morning. I was half asleep, navigating through the crowds, the glare of the lights, the murmur of announcements. I'd just been through security and I was making my way to the gate. I had my boarding pass tucked safely inside my passport, or so I thought. I could almost feel it there, that crisp piece of paper. But when I got to the gate and the agent asked for it, my fingers fumbled. My stomach did a little flip. The boarding pass wasn't there. I checked my pockets, my carry-on bag, the folds of my jacket. Nothing. A cold wave of panic, much larger than the situation probably warranted, washed over me. The airport, which had been a blur of sleepy indifference moments before, suddenly sharpened into a place of acute stress. My flight was boarding. My mind raced. Did I drop it at security? Did I leave it at the coffee stand? My tired brain struggled to replay the last half hour, each memory fuzzy and unreliable. It felt like that small essential piece of paper, my permission to travel, had simply ceased to exist. After a few frantic minutes that felt like an eternity, an airport employee, seeing my distress, helped me retrace my steps. And there it was, lying forlornly on the floor near the security checkpoint, somehow slipped from my grasp. The relief was overwhelming, almost dizzying. Now that was just a boarding pass, a replaceable piece of paper. But that fleeting, intense feeling of something vital having vanished without explanation, that momentary disconnect from the expected order of things, It gives us the tiniest, faintest echo of what it must be to face the disappearance of something or someone infinitely more precious. How does a massive modern jetliner, a beacon of technology and safety, simply cease to be traceable? It's this profound sense of disbelief, this jarring interruption of the world as we know it, that creates such a deep need within us to understand, to seek answers, to fill that void with possibilities, no matter how remote they might seem. It connects the enormous, almost incomprehensible mystery of a flight like MH300 to something very small and very human within each of us. That feeling of bewildered loss when something we counted on is suddenly, inexplicably, gone. Let us now very gently, very carefully trace the last known movements, the final recorded heartbeats of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. We need to lay this foundation of facts, the established sequence of events, because it's upon this bedrock that all the searches, all the analyses, and all the myriad theories have been built. It was, as we've noted, the early hours of Saturday, March 8th, 2014, a typically warm and humid Malaysian night. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the Boeing 777-200ER aircraft bearing the registration 9MMRO stood ready. This was a workhorse of modern aviation, a twin-gene jet renowned for its safety record and long-range capabilities. Its scheduled destination was Beijing Capital International Airport in China, a journey of about 6 hours. This was a routine flight, designated MH370, a red-eye, the kind that business travelers and families often take to maximize their time at their destination. On board were 227 passengers. Among them were artists, engineers, families on holiday, people returning home, individuals embarking on new adventures. There were 5 infants, their journeys just beginning. They came from 14 different nations, a small global village encapsulated within the aluminium tube of the aircraft. In addition, there were 12 crew members, Malaysian nationals, tasked with the safety and comfort of everyone on board. In command was Captain Zahare Ahmad Shah, a highly experienced pilot, 53 years old with over 18,300 hours of flying experience. He was a training captain, deeply familiar with the Boeing 777. His first officer, or co-pilot, was Farik Abdul Hamid, who was 27 years old and, while having several thousand hours of flying experience, was in the process of completing his training for full certification on the Boeing 777. This flight was one of his final training flights. The aircraft pushed back from the gate at gate C1 at 12:25 AM on local Malaysian time. The engines spooled up with their familiar whine. After taxiing to the runway, MH370 was cleared for takeoff. At 12:41 AM, it lifted off gracefully from runway 32 right, climbing into the dark Malaysian sky. For the first half hour or so, everything appeared to be entirely normal, just one of countless flights crisscrossing the globe at any given moment. The aircraft ascended smoothly to its planned cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, following its designated flight path, heading northeast across the Malay Peninsula towards the South China Sea, en route to Vietnamese airspace. A crucial system on board modern aircraft like the 777 is the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS. This system allows for short data messages to be exchanged between the aircraft and ground stations, often used for automatically transmitting updates on engine performance and other aircraft systems. At 1:01 AM, ACARS sent its routine transmission of engine data back to Malaysia Airlines maintenance. This was perfectly normal. The next such transmission was scheduled for 1:31 AM. That transmission never arrived. This was perhaps the very first, almost imperceptible whisper that something was not as it should be, though it wouldn't have been noticed as an immediate alarm at that exact moment. At 1:07 AM, AirCars sent its last successful transmission. What data it contained isn't publicly detailed, but it was its final word. Shortly thereafter, at 1:19 AM, MH37 was approaching a navigational waypoint named Igari, which is where Malaysian Air Traffic Control would hand over responsibility for the flight to their Vietnamese counterparts in Ho Chi Minh City. A voice, calm and routine, believed by investigators to be that of First Officer Farik Hamid, made the last verbal radio call from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370. This was a standard professional sign-off indicating they were leaving Malaysian airspace. It was the very last voice communication received from the flight. Those words, "good night," now carry an unbearable weight of poignancy. Just 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., as MH370 was crossing from Malaysian into Vietnamese airspace near Agari, its transponder abruptly stopped transmitting. The transponder is the device that broadcasts the aircraft's identity, its altitude, and its speed to secondary air traffic control radar systems on the ground. Without it, the aircraft becomes much harder to track for civilian controllers. It effectively vanishes from their screens, or becomes just an unidentified blip if primary radar is also tracking it. When the transponder signal was lost, Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control could not establish contact with MH370 as expected. For a period, there was likely confusion, attempts to re-establish contact, checks between air traffic control centres. However, while civilian secondary radar lost MH370, military primary radar systems, which work by bouncing radio waves directly off objects and don't rely on a transponder, did continue to track an unidentified aircraft. This track, later analysed, showed that the aircraft, believed to be MH370, did not continue on its planned northeasterly course towards Vietnam. Instead, shortly after its transponder went silent, it made a sharp, deliberate turn to the west, back across the Malay Peninsula, flying south of the Thai border. This deviation was not announced, not authorised, and entirely inconsistent with its flight plan. Military radar continued to track this unidentified aircraft as it flew over the northern Malaysian island of Penang, then out over the Strait of Malacca and headed towards the Andaman Sea north of the Indonesian island of Sumatra. The last positive primary radar contact by Malaysian military radar was at 2:22 a.m. at a point about 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang. After that, it was beyond the range of their system. It had flown into an area with much sparser radar coverage. The aircraft was, for all conventional tracking purposes, a ghost. But it wasn't entirely silent electronically, not yet. One more system, designed for a different purpose, would offer the faintest, most tantalizing clues hours later. Clues that would eventually rewrite the entire search effort. For now, imagine that silent, dark aircraft, its cockpit unlit to the outside world, flying on an unknown heading over an unlit ocean, carrying its unsuspecting passengers and crew further and further into an unfolding, unimaginable mystery. The digital heartbeat of the plane, the ACARS reports, had ceased. The transponder, its electronic name tag, had gone dark. The reassuring voice from the cockpit had fallen silent after a simple good night. And what remained was the vast, unblinking darkness of the sea and the sky, and the soft, steady ticking of the cockpit clock, marking moments that no one on the ground yet knew were so critical, so irrevocably lost. That clock, its gentle beat, eventually fading in our minds into the vast, hushed sigh of the deep ocean that awaited. When the sun rose on March 8th and MH370 failed to arrive in Beijing, as scheduled, a chilling realization began to dawn. The silence that had stretched from minutes into hours was no longer a communications glitch. It was a profound emergency, one of the largest, most expensive, and most technologically challenging multinational search efforts in aviation history, slowly, painstakingly began to mobilize. In those first bewildering days, the primary focus was on the South China Sea. This was logical, as it lay along the aircraft's intended flight path between Malaysia and Vietnam, the area where its transponder signal was last received. Ships and aircraft from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Singapore, the United States, and other nations converged on these waters. They scoured the surface, an army of eyes searching for any sign, a telltale oil slick, a piece of floating wreckage, a life vest, anything that might indicate where the aircraft had gone down. Pilots flew grid patterns. Ship crews scanned the waves with high-powered binoculars. But the vast expanse of the South China Sea, despite its busy shipping lanes, yielded nothing. Days turned into weeks, and an increasingly desperate sense of frustration and bafflement grew. The ocean, usually so full of life and movement, remained stubbornly silent, offering no clues, no solace. It was as if the aircraft had simply evaporated. But as intelligence from military radar began to be analysed and understood, the data showing that sharp westward turn back across the Malay Peninsula and out into the Strait of Malacca, the focus of the search began its first major shift. This new information suggested the aircraft had flown for at least another hour in a direction completely opposite to its intended destination. The search area was dramatically altered, now encompassing the Strait of Malacca and the Andaman Sea. But this area too, despite intensive searching, revealed no trace of the missing Boeing. It was at this point that a series of faint, almost missed electronic whispers from space provided the most crucial, though deeply enigmatic set of clues. These were the now famous satellite handshakes, or pings. MH377 was equipped with a satellite communication system, often called SATCOM, which allows for data and voice communication even over remote oceanic areas. This system was provided by Inmarsat, a British satellite telecommunications company. Now, even after the ACARS system, which used the SATCOM link for its data transmissions, had stopped transmitting regular messages, and even after the aircraft's transponder was off, the Inmarsat satellite terminal on board MH370 continued to automatically respond to routine status queries, or pings, from an Inmarsat ground station. These pings were routed through one of Inmarsat's geostationary satellites, designated IO3F1, which was positioned high above the Indian Ocean, providing coverage to that vast region. These pings were not like GPS signals. They weren't designed to give a precise location. They were more like an automated hourly check-in, a signal from the aircraft's terminal, essentially saying, "Yes, I'm still here, I'm still powered on, and I'm still logged onto your network." There were 7 of these successful automated handshakes, recorded after MH377 disappeared from primary radar. The first of these pings was initiated by the ground station at 2:25 AM Malaysian time, just 3 minutes after that last military radar contact, at 2:22 AM. Subsequent pings occurred roughly on the hour, with the 7th and final complete ping occurring at 8:11 AM. There was then a partial ping at 8:19 AM, which investigators believe could have been the aircraft's satellite terminal attempting to log back on after a power interruption, possibly as the aircraft's engines flamed out due to fuel exhaustion. There was one additional, more complex transmission captured at 9:15 AM, also interpreted as a log-on request, which likely occurred as the aircraft was descending rapidly, perhaps after impact, when systems might have momentarily rebooted. The engineers at Inmarsat, working around the clock with Malaysian and international air accident investigators, performed an extraordinary feat of forensic data analysis on these incredibly faint and sparse signals by meticulously measuring something called the burst timing offset, BTO, which is essentially the time it took for the signal to travel from the satellite to the aircraft and then back to the ground station via the satellite. They could calculate the distance between the satellite and the aircraft at the precise moment of each ping. Since the satellite's position in its geostationary orbit was known with great accuracy, though it does have a slight north-south wobble, which they accounted for, this calculated distance described a circle on the Earth's surface where the aircraft must have been located at that time. Each ping, therefore, generated a ring, or arc, of possible locations, a final 7th arc, corresponding to the 8:11 AM ping with the 8:19 AM partial ping, also consistent with this arc, became the most critical, as it represented the likely point of fuel exhaustion and the end of the flight. But a circle stretching potentially thousands of miles across the ocean is still an enormous search area. This is where a second, even more subtle measurement came into play: the burst frequency offset, BFO. The BFO is a measure of the slight shift in the radio frequency of the ping signal. This shift is primarily caused by the Doppler effect, the same thing that makes a siren change pitch as it passes you. Same thing that makes a siren change pitch as it passes you. It's related to the speed and direction of the aircraft relative to the satellite. However, the calculation was incredibly complex, as it also had to account for the satellite's own slight motion, minute variations in the aircraft's transmitter crystal oscillator, which could change frequency with temperature, and other subtle atmospheric effects. By comparing the BFO values actually recorded from MH370's pings with values predicted from various simulated flight paths, specifically whether the aircraft turned north or south after its last radar contact, the analysts could determine, with a high degree of confidence, which direction was consistent with the data. The calculations pointed overwhelmingly towards a southern corridor. A flight path to the north would have taken MH370 over land, across populous countries with extensive radar coverage, where it would surely have been detected. The BFO data simply didn't fit a northern route. It fit a southern one, taking the aircraft deep into the vast, remote, and incredibly deep waters of the southern Indian Ocean, west of us. This meticulous, groundbreaking analysis is what led the search to one of the most desolate and uncharted places on Earth. The subsequent underwater search, primarily led by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, was an unprecedented undertaking. Specialised ships, equipped with sophisticated towed sonar systems and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, were deployed to meticulously scan the seabed along this seventh arc. The search areas were often at depths exceeding 4,000 to 5,000 metres, over 2.5 to 3 miles down, where the pressure is immense and the darkness absolute. The ocean floor in this region is not flat. It's a rugged landscape of underwater mountains, volcanoes, ridges, and deep trenches, much of it previously unmapped. Despite years of intensive searching covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometres, the main wreckage of MH300 was not located within these designated priority search zones. The silence from the ocean depths remained. However, pieces of debris, later confirmed or deemed highly likely to be from MH300, did eventually begin to wash ashore, thousands of miles away, on the coastlines of islands and countries in the Western Indian Ocean. In July 2015, more than a year after the disappearance, a section of an aircraft's wing, a flaperon, was found on Reunion Island, east of Madagascar. Serial numbers and maintenance records confirmed it was from the missing Boeing 777-9M MRO. This was the first piece of physical evidence. In the months and years that followed, other pieces of debris, including parts of a horizontal stabilizer, an engine cowling, interior cabin fragments, and even personal items, were discovered on the coasts of Mozambique, South Africa, Mauritius, and Tanzania. Oceanographers specializing in drift analysis confirmed that these locations were consistent with currents originating from the general area of the southern Indian Ocean search zone. Given the time frame, these tangible pieces of the lost aircraft were heartbreaking proof of a catastrophic end to the flight. They spoke of immense forces, of an impact with the ocean, yet they offered very few clues as to why this happened or exactly where the main impact occurred. The ocean, in its slow, relentless way, was returning these fragments, almost like the gentle, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping giant, offering tiny pieces of its hidden secret, yet keeping the core of the mystery locked deep within its vast, dark and shifting waters. The rational inquiry provided a path, a direction, but the sheer immensity of the ocean continued to hold the final answers, tantalizingly just out of reach. In that vast, echoing space left by the absence of clear, definitive answers, it's only human for the mind to try and fill the void. When the facts are few and far between, like scattered stars in a cloudy night sky, speculation often rushes in, attempting to connect those distant points of light into a recognizable constellation. The mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, with its sparse clues and profound silence, has, perhaps inevitably, become a fertile ground for numerous theories. Some of these theories are grounded in what seems plausible, albeit tragic, based on the limited evidence. Others drift into more shadowy, complex, and sometimes far-fetched realms. Let us now, with that same gentle respect we've maintained, consider some of the more plausible conspiracies, or perhaps more accurately, the unresolved scenarios that investigators, aviation experts, and the public have grappled with. Think of it, if you will, like carefully brewing a pot of tea. You add the leaves, the known facts, to the hot water, the unknown. Some theories emerge as a strong, clear infusion, the logic consistent, the flavour, though perhaps bitter, recognisable. Other theories remain somewhat diluted. Like a weaker tea, the components not quite coming together, lacking the strength to hold their form under closer scrutiny. One of the most persistently discussed, and for many the most disturbing of these scenarios, is the theory of deliberate pilot action. Specifically, this theory centres on the possibility that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah intentionally crashed the aircraft in a horrifically planned act of murder-suicide, taking all 238 other souls on board with him. This is a deeply unsettling thought, one that chills to the bone. This theory gained traction and has been given serious consideration by some investigators due to several factors that are hard to explain otherwise. The way the aircraft's communication systems, the transponder and the ACARs, were systematically switched off points to someone with detailed knowledge of the Boeing 777 cockpit and its systems. The sharp, manually flown turn to the west, deviating completely from the flight plan and the subsequent flight path that seemed designed to avoid primary radar detection by flying along the boundaries of different flight information regions, also suggest deliberate, knowledgeable control. Furthermore, forensic examination of Captain Zahari's home computer revealed that he had used his sophisticated home flight simulator to plot a course deep into the southern Indian Ocean. A route eerily similar to the one the Inmarsat data suggests MH370 ultimately flew. However, it's important to note that pilots often simulate unusual or emergency scenarios, so this in itself is not conclusive proof of intent. Many who knew Captain Zahari, his friends, his family, his colleagues, have vehemently rejected this theory. They describe him as a kind, gentle, dedicated professional, a loving family man, utterly incapable of such a monstrous act. No suicide note was ever found. No clear, compelling motive has ever been established that would explain such a devastating decision. Official reports from the Malaysian authorities have been very careful not to definitively assign blame in this regard, acknowledging it as a possibility among others, but not concluding it. Yet the possibility lingers, a dark shadow over the technical data. If this theory were true, then those 7 hours of silent, automated pings from the aircraft as it flew steadily south become a haunting testament to a meticulously planned, solitary, and tragic final journey. Another prominent theory revolves around a catastrophic event occurring within the aircraft, specifically in the cockpit, such as a sudden, intense fire or a rapid, explosive decompression. This event could have quickly incapacitated the crew, perhaps through hypoxia, a severe lack of oxygen, or through being overcome by smoke and fumes. In this scenario, with the pilots unconscious or deceased, the aircraft could have continued to fly on autopilot, following its last programmed heading or defaulting to a straight path until its fuel was finally exhausted. This is often referred to as a ghost flight. This theory could potentially explain the sudden loss of communications and the deviation from the flight path if, for instance, the pilots were attempting to turn back towards the nearest suitable airport, like Penang or Langkawi in Malaysia, to make an emergency landing before they succumbed. The Boeing 777 is designed with multiple redundancies, but a severe electrical fire, perhaps originating in the cockpit electronics or involving the highly flammable emergency oxygen system, could potentially disable critical communication and navigation systems and fill the cockpit with dense toxic smoke very, very quickly. There are historical precedents for such ghost flights. The Helios Airways Flight 522 disaster in 2005 is one such example, where a gradual loss of cabin pressure incapacitated the crew and the aircraft flew on autopilot for hours before running out of fuel and crashing. However, for MH370, some find it difficult to reconcile the apparently deliberate and precise maneuvers observed on military radar, the specific turn west, the navigation along waypoints, with a crew that was simultaneously struggling with a catastrophic, disorienting emergency. Why no distress call, not even a partial one, if there was even a brief moment of awareness before incapacitation? Though, it must be said, a truly explosive event or a fire that very rapidly destroyed communication equipment could explain the silence. This theory offers a tragic, accidental explanation, but some of the aircraft's later movements remain puzzling under this framework. A third possibility, though generally considered less likely by many official investigators, is that of a hijack. This scenario branches into several sub-theories. Perhaps it was a hijack for ransom, though no demands were ever made. Perhaps it was for political motives, though no credible group ever claimed responsibility. Or perhaps, most chillingly, it was an attempt to use the aircraft as a weapon, similar to the September 11th attacks, though the long flight south to a remote ocean location seems to contradict this specific motive, unless the plan was thwarted or altered mid-flight. The deliberate disabling of the communication systems and the careful stealthy rerouting of the aircraft could certainly be consistent with a sophisticated hijack operation. However, there are significant challenges to this theory. Firstly, as mentioned, the lack of any claim of responsibility or any demands is highly unusual for most hijack scenarios. Secondly, it was reported that some of the passengers' mobile phones continued to ring, though not connect for some time after the aircraft disappeared from primary radar. While the complexities of mobile networks at altitude make this information difficult to interpret definitively, some argue it might suggest the aircraft was not at its normal cruising altitude for that entire period, or that conditions in the cabin were not as controlled as a hijacker might wish. More significantly, the level of aviation expertise required to navigate the Boeing 777 in the manner observed, disable specific systems, and then fly it for many hours undetected would be exceptionally high. If the motive of such skilled hijackers was to land the aircraft at a secret location, its ultimate presumed end in the desolate southern Indian Ocean seems entirely counterproductive. While the possibility of a novel, meticulously planned hijack with an unknown, unconventional motive cannot be entirely dismissed out of hand, it generally has fewer direct supporting data points from the available evidence, compared to the other scenarios we've discussed. Each of these theories, deliberate pilot action, a ghost flight resulting from an accident or incapacitation, or a sophisticated hijack, attempts to weave the few known, hard facts into a coherent narrative that explains the inexplicable. Some of these theories, like that cup of strong, dark tea, seem to hold their form when you swirl them around, their internal logic aligning with the radar tracks and the satellite pings, even if the implications are deeply unpalatable. Others, perhaps more like a weaker, more translucent infusion, tend to dilute quickly when subjected to detailed scrutiny, leaving behind more questions than answers, more sediment than clarity. The actual truth, if it is ever fully known, may well be a complex blend of factors. Something not yet clearly discernible in the faint patterns left behind in the data and the debris. And so we continue to gently turn these possibilities over in our minds in the quiet of the night, hoping for a moment of insight, a flicker of understanding that might illuminate this profound and lingering darkness. As you listen, allow your own mind to be gentle with these thoughts. There are no easy answers here, only the shared human experience of pondering a deep and sorrowful mystery. Beyond the theories that have been formally investigated and debated by aviation authorities and mainstream experts, the sheer mind-boggling nature of MH370's disappearance has, quite naturally, opened the floodgates to a wider ocean of speculation. These are what some might call the wilder theories, conjectures that often venture into the realms of high-tech espionage covert military operations, geopolitical intrigue, or even events that seem to border on science fiction. While many seasoned experts find these theories highly improbable, lacking credible evidence, they persist. They live on in the digital currents of online forums. They are debated in hushed tones in late-night conversations, and they capture the imagination because they offer dramatic, if often far-fetched, explanations for an event that otherwise seems to defy all conventional understanding. Let us, with that same spirit of gentle, open-minded inquiry, touch upon a few of these, while also noting respectfully why they often struggle to gain lasting traction among those most deeply involved in the technical investigation. One such theory that gained considerable attention, particularly in the earlier days, was the idea of a cyber hijack. The premise here is that MH370 was remotely commandeered, its complex flight systems hacked into, perhaps through its satellite communication link, the very system that later provided the pings, or via some other undiscovered electronic vulnerability. In this scenario, shadowy, unknown actors could have taken control of the aircraft from a remote ground station, or even from another aircraft in the vicinity, reprogramming its flight path and directing it for their own nefarious purposes, all without the pilots being able to intervene. Or perhaps even being aware of what was happening until it was too late. Proponents of this theory often point to the increasing computerization of modern aircraft and the potential for digital systems to be compromised. However, aviation security experts and Boeing engineers have largely discounted this possibility for a Boeing 777 of that specific era and configuration. The critical flight control systems on such an aircraft are designed to be highly isolated, air-gapped from external communication networks like the passenger Wi-Fi system or even the ACARS and SATCOM data links, in a way that would make direct remote flight control exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, without significant unauthorized physical modifications to the aircraft's wiring or the collusion of someone with insider access to highly secure systems. While future generations of aircraft might face evolving cyber threats, the broad consensus among experts is that the technology and protocols in place on the MH370 aircraft in 2014 made such a sophisticated remote seizure of flight controls practically unfeasible. Another prominent theory that has been a recurring theme in online discussions involves the remote and highly secure US naval and air base on the island of Diego Garcia, located in the central Indian Ocean. This theory in its various forms suggests that MH307 was either intentionally flown there by someone on board, or was perhaps forced or diverted to land there by external actors, possibly because it was carrying unusually sensitive cargo or a person of particular interest to certain intelligence agencies. Some versions of this theory even allege a subsequent cover-up by US authorities, while the initial westward track of MH370, if extended, might vaguely head in the general direction of Diego Garcia. Though it's a vast ocean, there are significant problems with this idea. The base is one of the most heavily monitored and strategically important military installations in the world, equipped with sophisticated radar and surveillance systems. An unauthorized approach and landing of a large commercial airliner like a Boeing 777 would be an extraordinary event, incredibly difficult to achieve without detection, and even more difficult to conceal afterward. Moreover, US authorities have categorically and repeatedly denied any involvement or any knowledge of the aircraft landing there or being in its vicinity. Critically, the Inmarsat satellite ping data, which indicates a long, continuous flight path heading far south for many hours, is fundamentally inconsistent with a landing at Diego Garcia, which is situated much further north than the final ping arcs. Derived from that data, there is a certain mystique and inherent suspicion that often surrounds secretive military bases, making them a focal point for conspiracy theories. But in the case of MH370, the available evidence, particularly the satellite data, makes a Diego Garcia landing scenario extremely difficult to sustain. Then there is the chilling and undeniably dramatic possibility of an accidental shoot-down. All right, this theory posits that MH370 was mistakenly shot down, perhaps during a clandestine or unannounced military exercise being conducted in the region, or due to a tragic case of mistaken identity by a nation's air defense system. In such a scenario, the subsequent disappearance and the long silence would, according to the theory, be part of a massive, multinational cover-up operation designed to avoid international condemnation, geopolitical crisis, or admissions of catastrophic error. History, unfortunately, does contain a few tragic instances where civilian airliners have been mistakenly shot down by military forces. However, applying this theory to MH300 presents several challenges. The initially recorded flight path, followed by the long, hours-long journey deep into the southern Indian Ocean, as indicated by the Inmarsat pings, doesn't neatly align with the airspace typically associated with tense military standoffs, active conflict zones, or major training exercises that might lead to such a catastrophic error without immediate and widespread geopolitical repercussions. Furthermore, successfully concealing such an event, which would involve the widespread scattering of aircraft wreckage, the need to silence hundreds if not thousands of military personnel, and the fabrication or suppression of radar and satellite data across multiple nations, would require an almost unprecedented level of coordinated deception on a global scale. A conspiracy of truly immense proportions, without a single credible whistleblower or piece of contradictory physical evidence surfacing in all the years since. While the thought of a shootdown is undeniably shocking and captures a certain dramatic imagination, experts generally find that the extended, unmolested flight path south, as strongly indicated by the robust Inmarsat data, provides a more compelling, though still tragic, narrative for the aircraft's ultimate end-of-flight location than theories requiring such an extraordinarily complex and flawlessly executed global cover-up. These wilder theories, while often lacking in concrete, verifiable evidence and frequently discounted by the majority of technical experts, nevertheless speak to something deep within the human psyche. They reflect a profound desire to find a grand narrative, sometimes a conspiratorial one, when faced with an event so baffling, so sudden and so tragic that it seems to defy ordinary explanation. They can reflect a natural distrust of official explanations, especially when those explanations are incomplete or evolving. Or they may stem from a psychological need for the scale of the cause of a disaster to somehow match the enormous scale of its effect. Each of these theories is given its brief, gentle moment in the quiet of our shared consideration tonight. We acknowledge them as part of the wider spectrum of human response to the profound unknown, a testament to the mind's restless search for answers, before we softly note why the weight of expert opinion and the thread of available evidence often lead us back towards more terrestrial, if no less heartbreaking and perplexing possibility. The faint, almost inaudible whisper of wind, perhaps carrying the scent of tropical rain over a deserted, unseen runway, reminds us that some places, and indeed some stories, hold their secrets very, very tightly, fueling the imagination to fill the silence. Why is it, do you think, that in the face of such profound, echoing ambiguity, such an aching void of concrete information, that theories involving conspiracy, intrigue, or hidden knowledge seem to bloom so readily, so persistently? The story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 isn't just a technical puzzle about a missing airplane. It's also a deeply human story, a story that holds up a mirror to our own psychology, revealing how our minds try to cope with the unbearable weight of the unknown, especially an unknown tinged with such widespread tragedy and loss. It feels like a natural and important part of our quiet exploration tonight to move gently from asking, what happened to the plane, to also asking, why do we as humans believe the various things we believe about what happened? Understanding this doesn't solve the core mystery, of course, but it helps us understand ourselves a little better as we navigate a world that is often frustratingly short on definitive answers. At the very heart of this tendency, I believe, lies our innate, almost instinctual discomfort with uncertainty, with unresolved questions. Human brains are, in many ways, quite remarkable pattern-seeking machines. We are wired to look for connections, to find order, to create coherence, to craft explanations for the world around us. It's a survival mechanism, honed over millennia. When an event as significant, as globally impactful as the disappearance of a large modern airliner carrying hundreds of souls occurs, and the official, most heavily investigated explanation is, essentially, we don't definitively know what happened or precisely where it is, it leaves a jarring cognitive dissonance. It creates a gap, an intellectual and emotional vacuum that the mind instinctively, almost automatically, tries to fill. A straightforward, though deeply tragic accident involving mechanical failure or a sequence of human errors might be one possible explanation. But for some people, the sheer, almost unthinkable scale of the event, a massive piece of technology simply vanishing from the 21st century world, feels like it demands a cause of equally epic magnitude. Something more complex, perhaps more deliberate, more sinister, than a more mundane, if still devastating, confluence of factors. Grief, in its many forms, also plays an undeniably powerful role, especially for those most directly and devastatingly affected, for the families and friends of the passengers and crew. For them, the lack of closure, the endless not knowing where their loved ones are, or what truly transpired in those final hours, is an ongoing, daily torment, an open wound that cannot properly begin to heal. In such unimaginable circumstances of prolonged ambiguity and sorrow, any narrative that offers even a glimmer of a potential answer, any path that might, however faintly, lead towards some form of resolution or understanding, can naturally be explored. Some conspiracy theories might even, for a time, offer a sliver of desperate hope, however improbable. The idea that the plane landed safely somewhere, however remote, that loved ones might somehow still be alive, even if held captive or hidden. This isn't to say that families indiscriminately embrace all or any wild theories, not at all, but the profound, desperate human need for answers, for something to hold on to in the face of such an abyss, can understandably make people more receptive to exploring possibilities that lie outside the official and still tragically unresolved narrative. Then there's the very powerful human need for narrative closure itself. We are fundamentally storytelling creatures. It's how we make sense of the world, how we pass on knowledge, how we build cultures. Stories, as we intuitively understand them, have beginnings, middles, and crucially, ends. The story of MH300 has a shocking, abrupt beginning. It has a deeply perplexing, prolonged middle, filled with searches and faint clues, but it has no clear, confirmed, satisfying end. This profound incompleteness is deeply unsatisfying to the human mind. Conspiracy theories often provide that missing ending. They craft a complete tale, connecting the dots, even if they have to draw some of those dots in themselves. They can offer a sense of agency, suggesting that the event wasn't just a random, senseless tragedy, but something orchestrated, controlled, or at least understood by someone, somewhere. This can, paradoxically, feel more manageable, more psychologically contained, than the terrifying alternative, the idea that we live in a universe where something so enormous, so vital, can simply vanish without a full explanation, beyond our immediate comprehension or control. Our own cognitive biases, those little shortcuts and quirks in how our brains process information, also come into play significantly. There's confirmation bias, for instance, which is our tendency to seek out, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports our pre-existing beliefs or values. So, if someone is already predisposed to distrust authority or large institutions, they may be more likely to gravitate towards and readily accept theories that posit a government cover-up or corporate negligence, while perhaps too easily dismissing evidence or arguments that contradict that view. There's also something called pareidolia, which is our fascinating human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns or images in random or ambiguous visual or auditory data, like seeing faces in clouds, or hearing whispers in static. In the context of MH370, this could lead amateur sleuths, with the best of intentions, to see significant shapes in grainy satellite images of the ocean surface, or to find hidden codes in unrelated data logs, patterns that aren't actually there, but are projected by the pattern-seeking mind. And we often fall prey to what's known as proportionality bias, the intuitive assumption that big, significant events must have correspondingly big, significant causes. The vanishing of a huge Boeing 777 airliner is a monumental event, a global shock. Therefore, some feel, intuitively, that the cause must be equally monumental, a complex international plot, a secret military operation, a technological marvel of malice, rather than, say, a more prosaic, though still deeply tragic and complex, sequence of unforeseen technical failures compounded by human factors or environmental conditions. Think about a time when you've been waiting for a significantly delayed flight at an airport. Those hours of uncertainty can feel so much longer than they objectively are, can't they? You're in a kind of limbo, stuck between your origin and your destination. You keep scanning the departure boards, you strain to hear announcements over the tannoy, you might pester the gate agents, all in a desperate search for information. Any information that will resolve the uncertainty and tell you when or even if you'll finally reach where you're trying to go. That feeling of being suspended, of lacking control, of being starved for clear answers is a tiny, everyday microcosm of the much larger, much more profound feeling engendered by the enduring mystery of MH370. Conspiracy theories, in their own complex and often unhelpful way, are sometimes an attempt to make that departure board of life show something, anything, other than delayed indefinitely or further information unavailable. They are a testament, in a way, to the relentless, often subconscious, human drive to understand, to make sense of the insensible, to find a story that fits, even if it means venturing into the shadowy, often treacherous landscapes of speculation and unverified belief. It's a part of what makes us human, this quest for meaning, even when meaning is hardest to find. The mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 didn't just unfold in the darkened skies over Southeast Asia and the deep, remote waters of the southern Indian Ocean. It also erupted almost simultaneously across the flickering screens, the interconnected networks, and the echoing chambers of our increasingly digital world. The first news alerts, sparse and urgent, rippled outwards from news agencies, rapidly transforming into a global media event of immense proportions. And then it settled into something more persistent, an evolving, ever-debated saga, playing out in the vast, often overwhelming digital landscapes of the internet. This digital dimension, how the story was consumed, shared, and reinterpreted online, became a crucial and fascinating part of the MH370 narrative itself. It shaped public perception, it fueled widespread speculation, and it created both dedicated communities of earnest inquiry and bewildering whirlpools of misinformation. In the initial days and weeks, traditional media outlets, newspapers with their bold headlines, television news channels with their round-the-clock coverage, and established online news sites provided the primary widespread dissemination of facts as they became available, or as they were officially released. Press conferences held by Malaysian government officials, by the Australian authorities leading the underwater search, and by experts from Inmarsat were broadcast globally, passed and analysed. Images of grieving families, their faces etched with unbearable sorrow and disbelief, became heartbreakingly familiar. Maps showing potential flight paths and vast search areas were constantly updated. Profiles of the pilots, their histories, and their lives were scrutinised. The story had all the elements of intensely compelling news, a profound, almost unprecedented modern mystery, deep human tragedy on a large scale, the involvement of cutting-edge aviation and satellite technology, and a distinct undercurrent of international intrigue and cooperation, or sometimes perceived lack thereof. The 24/7 news cycle, always hungry for developments, ensured that MH370 remained at the forefront of global consciousness for many weeks, then months, and has continued to resurface intermittently for years whenever a new piece of debris was found, a new analytical report was published, or a significant anniversary was marked. But alongside this official and mainstream media narrative, and often moving at a much faster, more chaotic pace, was the incredible, almost explosive surge of discussion, theorizing and amateur sleuthing on the internet. Online forums, particularly Reddit, became massive, sprawling hubs where aviation enthusiasts, retired pilots, engineers, data analysts, and simply concerned, curious citizens from every corner of the globe could gather virtually. They would dissect every available scrap of information: flight data, weather reports, pilot biographies, aircraft schematics, leaked documents, some authentic, some not. Threads dedicated to MH300 grew to enormous lengths, containing thousands, even tens of thousands of comments, as users shared raw data, proposed intricate theories, meticulously scrutinized publicly available satellite imagery from platforms like TomNod, which crowdsourced the search for wreckage, and debated endlessly, sometimes constructively, sometimes contentiously. Some of these online communities, driven by a genuine collective desire to solve the puzzle, actually performed remarkable feats of crowd-sourced analysis, occasionally pointing out inconsistencies in official statements or highlighting overlooked details in complex data sets. Pilots and air traffic controllers shared their professional insights, helping to educate the lay public on the intricate complexities of modern aviation and air traffic management. Flight simulator enthusiasts attempted to replicate the aircraft's supposed final hours, testing various scenarios. There was, in many corners, a genuine, powerful collective effort to solve the puzzle. A sort of global, digital detective agency spontaneously coming into being. However, this unprecedented digital deluge also had a significant and often troubling darker side. Misinformation, disinformation, and entirely unfounded, baseless rumours spread with alarming speed and reach, often like a digital wildfire. Doctored photographs, misattributed quotes, creatively edited videos, and completely fabricated eyewitness accounts or leaked insider information would surface and circulate rapidly through social media platforms. The very nature of platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and later WhatsApp and Telegram, designed for rapid, widespread sharing, meant that a sensational but entirely untrue claim could achieve viral status, seen by millions, long before credible fact-checkers or official sources could effectively debunk. This infodemic, as it has sometimes been called, added yet another layer of confusion and, most cruelly, often another layer of profound pain and false hope for the families of those on board, who were frequently exposed to a relentless barrage of conflicting, irresponsible, and sometimes deeply hurtful theories and claims. More recently, newer social media platforms like TikTok have seen a fresh wave of interest in the MH370 mystery. Clue hunters, often younger users discovering the complexities of the case for the first time, create short, engaging videos proposing various theories, highlighting supposed anomalies in publicly available satellite images or flight data, or revisiting old discredited ideas as if they are new revelations. While some of this content is undoubtedly well-intentioned, driven by genuine curiosity, much of it can be superficial, lacking rigorous analysis, critical context, or an understanding of the extensive work already done by official investigators and technical experts. The visual, algorithm-driven nature of these platforms can often prioritize engagement, sensationalism, and clickbait over factual accuracy and nuanced discussion. It's a truly strange and uniquely modern phenomenon, this digital reflection, this vast echoing chamber of a real-world mystery. We find ourselves scrolling endlessly, it can seem, through feeds and timelines, clicking on links that promise new insights, our eyes scanning headlines, our minds trying to process a torrent of information, some credible, much of it not. It's so easy to get drawn in, to feel the magnetic pull of the internet rabbit hole, especially with a mystery as compelling and unresolved as MH370. As you listen to these words, perhaps even as your own phone or computer screen glows softly nearby, just take a moment with me. Remind yourself to breathe, deeply and slowly. Perhaps consciously unclench your jaw or the hand that might be gripping your phone. Let your gaze soften. The search for answers, for understanding, is a deeply human one, a natural instinct. But it's so important to try and navigate these vast digital waters with awareness, with a critical eye, seeking out credible sources, cross-referencing information, and always remembering the very real, very profound human tragedy that lies at the heart of all the pixels, posts, theories, and debates. The media echoes and the unending internet discussions are now an indelible part of the mid-370 story, a complex testament to its enduring power to capture, to mystify, and sometimes to mislead the global imagination. We've touched a couple of times now on those remarkable Inmarsat satellite pings, those faint, almost ethereal electronic handshakes across vast distances of space that became the most crucial and indeed almost the only clues to MH370's path in the long, silent hours after it vanished from all conventional radar. Now, let's try to delve just a little deeper, very gently, into how these signals were analysed by the brilliant engineers and scientists who worked on them. We want to appreciate the extraordinary science involved, the sheer ingenuity, but we'll keep it light, avoiding the dense forest of technical jargon. Think of it like admiring the intricate, delicate workings of a beautiful antique clock from the outside, marvelling at its precision and craftsmanship, without necessarily needing to understand every single gear and spring, or be a master clockmaker ourselves. The core idea, as we mentioned, revolves around those two key measurements extracted from the pings, the BTO, which stands for Burst Timing Offset, and the BFO, which stands for Burst Frequency Offset. Let's take the BTO first. When the Inmarsat ground station, located in Perth, Australia, sent an automated query signal up to its geostationary satellite, the one called IO3F1, hovering high above the Indian Ocean, that satellite then relayed the signal down to MH300's satellite terminal. The aircraft's terminal, upon receiving this query, would automatically generate and send a response signal back up to the satellite, which then relayed it back down to the ground station in Perth. The Burst Timing Offset, the BTO, was, very simply put, a precise measure of the total time it took for that entire round-trip communication to occur from ground station to satellite to aircraft, back to satellite and back to ground station. Now, because radio waves, which these signals are, travel at the speed of light, a known and constant speed, knowing this total round-trip time delay allowed the Inmarsat engineers to calculate the total distance the signal had travelled. Except, since they knew the fixed distance from the ground station to the satellite and back, they could subtract that, and what remained was the distance related to the satellite, to aircraft, to satellite portion of the journey. This, in turn, allowed them to calculate the precise distance from the satellite to the aircraft at the exact moment of each ping. And because the Inmarsat satellite IO3F1 is in a geostationary orbit, its position relative to the Earth's surface is largely fixed, though it does have a slight, predictable north-south wobble throughout the day, which the engineers meticulously accounted for. So, for each ping, if you know the satellite's precise location in space at that specific instant, and you know the distance from the satellite to the aircraft, that defines a perfect circle on the Earth's surface. The aircraft must have been located somewhere on that circle at that time. Each of the 7 successful pings thus created a series of concentric circles, or arcs, on the map of the Indian Ocean. The 7th and final full ping, which occurred at 8:11 AM Malaysian time, this corresponds to 0:11 UTC in the official logs, created the now famous 7th arc. This arc, representing the farthest reach of the aircraft based on the pings, became the prime area for the subsequent underwater search, as it was considered the most likely region where the aircraft would have exhausted its fuel and descended into the ocean. There was also that partial ping recorded at 8:19 AM and a final log-on request from the aircraft's terminal at 9:15 AM, which analyses suggest are also consistent with the aircraft being on or very near this 7th arc, possibly indicating the turbulent moments of fuel exhaustion, engine flameout, and the final impact or system shutdown. Now, a circle stretching thousands of miles across a vast ocean still represents an enormous potential search area. It tells you how far the plane was from the satellite, but not its direction along that circle. This is where the second, even more subtle and complex measurement came into play. The BFO, or burst frequency offset. The BFO measures the very slight difference between the frequency of the signal that the ground station expected to receive back from the aircraft and the frequency that was actually received. This tiny shift in frequency is primarily due to the Doppler effect. It's the same basic principle that makes an ambulance siren sound higher in pitch as it speeds towards you and then lower in pitch as it speeds away from you. In this case, it was the movement of the aircraft relative to the Inmarsat satellite that caused the frequency of its transmitted ping to shift slightly. If the aircraft was moving towards the satellite's effective position, the frequency would increase. If it was moving away, the frequency would decrease. However, calculating the BFO was far more complex than a simple Doppler shift from a moving source. The satellite itself has a slight, predictable motion in its orbit. The crystal oscillator in the aircraft's satellite transmitter, which generates the radio frequency, wasn't perfectly stable. Its exact frequency could drift minutely with changes in temperature, and there were other, even more subtle effects that had to be accounted for, such as the passage of the radio signal through the Earth's ionosphere, which can also affect its properties. It was an incredibly delicate and complex calculation. The engineers at Inmarsat, working closely with experts from the UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, because Inmarsat is a British company, and other international aviation safety bodies, developed incredibly sophisticated mathematical models. These models attempted to account for all these tiny variables by comparing the actual BFO values that were recorded from MH370's sequence of pings with the BFO values that would be predicted for various simulated flight paths, specifically considering different speeds, altitudes, and whether the aircraft had turned north or south after its last known primary radar position. They could determine which general direction of travel was most consistent with the recorded data. The results of this groundbreaking analysis pointed overwhelmingly, almost unequivocally, towards a southern flight path. A flight path to the north, which would have taken MH370 over land across populous countries like Thailand, China, or India, would have produced a very different set of BFO values, and it would almost certainly have been detected by numerous ground-based radar systems. The BFO data simply did not fit a northern route. It did, however, fit a southern route, one that took the aircraft steadily southwards for many hours, deep into the vast, remote, and largely unmonitored expanse of the southern Indian Ocean. The precision required for these BTO and BFO calculations was truly immense. Imagine these dedicated teams working under incredible pressure, trying to deduce the final flight path of a missing airliner over thousands of miles of empty ocean, based on just a handful of incredibly subtle variations in radio signals received from a satellite tens of thousands of miles up in space. It was an astonishing feat of reverse engineering, of forensic science, using the deepest principles of physics and mathematics to try and peer into the silent, unseen flight of a ghost plane. Of course, it wasn't perfect. No model is. There were inherent uncertainties in the analysis, assumptions that had to be made about things like the aircraft's exact speed and altitude during that long, unmonitored part of the flight. Though they tested various plausible scenarios, this is why the designated search area along that seventh arc was still very, very large, hundreds of miles long. But it was by far the best, most scientifically grounded information available at the time, and it remains so. Picture it if you can, the quiet, focused intensity in those rooms, perhaps the soft, rhythmic lapping of ocean water in our minds now, juxtaposed with the faint, almost subliminal clicks of a computer keyboard or a calculator, as these brilliant minds painstakingly tried to narrow down an impossibly vast search area to bring a single point of light into an overwhelming darkness. All this incredible intellectual effort, this mathematical rigor, set against the raw, immense, indifferent power of the southern Indian Ocean. It stands as a powerful testament to the human spirit, to our unwavering desire to bring order to chaos, to extract meaning from the faintest of signals, even when faced with the almost overwhelming scale of nature's vastness. This little technical deep dive, however light we've kept it, helps us appreciate that the subsequent search for MH370, though ultimately unsuccessful in locating the main wreckage, was not a random stab in the dark. It was guided by an extraordinary and unprecedented application of science and human reason, pushing the very boundaries of what could be inferred from so very, very little. And the ocean kept its secrets, despite these valiant efforts. The groundbreaking analysis of the Inmarsat data, for all its scientific brilliance and painstaking detail, ultimately pointed the search for MH317 towards an area of almost unimaginable scale and desolation, the vast, turbulent waters of the southern Indian Ocean. To truly begin to grasp why finding the main wreckage of this Boeing 777 has proven to be so profoundly, heartbreakingly difficult, we need to try and let our minds absorb the sheer, overwhelming vastness and the deeply inhospitable nature of this particular oceanic realm. It is quite literally like searching for a needle, not just in a haystack, as the old saying goes, but in a haystack that is the size of a small planet. A haystack that is constantly moving, shifting, churning. A haystack that is miles deep in many places and shrouded in perpetual, cold darkness. The southern Indian Ocean, particularly the remote regions where the search efforts were focused along that seventh arc, is one of the most isolated and treacherous bodies of water on Earth. This isn't the kind of ocean you see in holiday brochures. The search areas lie thousands of kilometers from any major landmass, far, far away from regular shipping lanes, far from any routine human observation. We're talking about an expanse that, even for the priority search zones, covered hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. For a little bit of context, the initial high-priority underwater search area mapped out by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, was approximately 120,000 square kilometers. That's an area larger than the entire country of South Korea, or about the size of the state of Pennsylvania. And this was just the priority zone, the area deemed most likely based on the analysis. The total potential area where the aircraft could conceivably have come down, considering the uncertainties in the calculations, was, and still remains, vastly, vastly larger. Then, there's the incredible depth of the ocean in this region. Much of the southern Indian Ocean floor, where the search was concentrated, lies at average depths of between 3,000 to 5,000 meters. That's roughly 10,000 to 16,000 feet, or about 2 to 3 miles straight down. In some specific locations, it plunges even deeper into abyssal plains and across complex, rugged underwater topography, featuring massive mountain ranges, seamounts, steep underwater cliffs, volcanoes, and deep, narrow trenches. Much of this underwater landscape was entirely unmapped and unknown before the search for MH370 began. Conducting a search at these extreme depths presents immense technological and logistical challenges. It requires highly specialized deep-sea submersible vehicles, sophisticated towed sonar arrays that can see through the darkness using sound, and advanced autonomous underwater vehicles, AUV. These AUVs are essentially robotic submarines, pre-programmed to survey specific areas, and they must be built to withstand the crushing pressures found at these depths, pressures hundreds of times greater than at sea level. They move very slowly, meticulously scanning the seabed strip by strip, a process that is incredibly time-consuming, painstakingly methodical, and also extraordinarily expensive. And the ocean itself is not a calm, static pool. The Southern Ocean is infamous for a band of strong westerly winds known as the Roaring Forties, referring to the latitudes between 40 and 50 degrees south. These powerful, persistent winds generate some of the largest waves and strongest currents on the planet. Weather conditions in the search area can be extreme and change rapidly, with storms often producing mountainous seas and gale force winds that can hamper or halt search operations for days or even weeks at a time. These same powerful, complex ocean currents also have a profound effect on how any floating debris from an aircraft would drift over time. While we know that pieces of MH370 did eventually wash ashore on distant coastlines in Africa and islands in the western Indian Ocean, accurately modelling their drift paths backwards over many months or even years, to pinpoint a precise origin point in the vastness of the eastern southern Indian Ocean is an incredibly complex and uncertain science. Many factors influence drift: the exact shape, size, and buoyancy of each piece of debris, how much it's affected by wind versus ocean currents. This is called windage, the unpredictable nature of ocean eddies and gyres. Imagine trying to trace the path of a single fallen leaf in a vast, turbulent river, but on an oceanic scale. One wing flap, a relatively small piece of a massive aircraft, adrift somewhere in an area of perhaps 60 million square kilometres of constantly shifting, churning water. The sheer scale of the challenge is almost too vast for the human mind to fully comprehend. Picture it: a single, dark, perhaps broken fragment, tossed by colossal waves, dwarfed by the endless, grey, heaving canvas of that remote sea, under a vast and indifferent sky. Even if the main wreckage of MH370 is lying relatively intact on the seabed, locating it remains an enormous challenge. It could have come to rest in a deep, narrow trench, shielded from sonar signals. It might have been covered by layers of sediment over the years, further obscuring it, or its sonar signature could be very similar to natural geological formations, rocks, ridges, or volcanic outcrops, making it incredibly difficult to distinguish wreckage from the natural clutter of the ocean floor, even with advanced imaging technology. We also have to remember that the aircraft's black boxes, the flight data recorder, FDR, and the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, which hold the crucial information about the flight's final moments, are designed to emit underwater locator beacon pings for only about 30 days, though some can last slightly longer, after they become submerged and activated by water. By the time the southern Indian Ocean search area was accurately defined based on the Inmarsat analysis, and the specialised deep-sea search equipment could be fully deployed to that remote region, this 30-day window had, tragically, long since closed. This meant that directly detecting the black boxes using their own locator pings was no longer possible. The searchers were effectively looking for silent objects in the vast, dark deep. The sheer, overwhelming loneliness of this watery expanse also plays a significant role in its ability to keep secrets. It is a place far removed from regular human eyes, a place where something as large as a Boeing 777 could fall from the sky and be swallowed by the waves with no witnesses, no immediate trace. It serves as a very sobering reminder of the immense power of nature and the inherent limits of our current ability to monitor and survey every remote corner of our planet, despite our advanced technology. The heroic and hugely expensive efforts to find MH370 have, in fact, pushed the known boundaries of ocean exploration and underwater search technology. Yet, the ocean's profound vastness remains its greatest, most effective shield, perfectly capable of concealing even something as large as a modern jetliner beneath its deep, dark, cold, and ever-shifting cloak. The search for that single lost aircraft became, almost inadvertently, a significant deep-sea mapping expedition, charting some of the least known and most rugged parts of our planet's underwater terrain. A poignant testament to how much of our world, even in the 21st century, remains a profound and challenging mystery. The unresolved, deeply perplexing mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, while chillingly unique in its specific modern context and the particular technological puzzles it presents, finds sombre echoes in the long, often dramatic and sometimes tragic history of aviation. It stands as a stark and sorrowful reminder that even in our current age of incredible technological advancement, with sophisticated navigation systems, global satellite coverage, and highly reliable aircraft, the vastness of the skies and the immense, unforgiving nature of the world's oceans can still claim secrets, can still swallow endeavours whole, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of human frailty. Looking back at these historical echoes, these earlier stories of vanishing aircraft, doesn't diminish the specific, individual tragedy of MH370, nor does it provide direct answers to its unique riddles. But it does, perhaps, offer a certain context, a wider perspective. It helps us see MH370 not as an entirely unprecedented anomaly, but as another profoundly sorrowful chapter in humanity's long and courageous, yet sometimes perilous, engagement with the challenge of flight, and our enduring fascination with, and sometimes heartbreaking defeat by, the profound mysteries of disappearance. One of the most iconic, almost legendary, of these earlier aviation mysteries is, of course, the vanishing of Amelia Earhart. In July 1937, during her incredibly ambitious attempt to become the first woman to circumnavigate the globe by air, Earhart, along with her skilled navigator Fred Noonan, disappeared over the central Pacific Ocean. They were on one of the final, most challenging legs of their journey, en route to Howland Island, a tiny, remote speck of land. Despite extensive searches conducted by the US Navy and Coast Guard, at the time one of the largest sea searches up to that point, and despite numerous privately funded expeditions and the rise of countless theories in the 80-plus years since, their exact fate and the precise location of their Lockheed Electra aircraft remain one of aviation's most enduring and debated enigmas. Did they run out of fuel and crash into the vast Pacific, sinking without a trace? Did they manage to land or crash land on an uninhabited atoll, perhaps Nikumaroro Island, as one prominent theory suggests, and perish there as castaways? The lack of definitive wreckage or any incontrovertible physical remains has allowed speculation, research, and passionate debate to flourish for generations. Much like the uncertainty that continues to surround MH370, Earhart's enduring story powerfully highlights how, even with less complex aircraft and in an era of less sophisticated tracking, the sheer, overwhelming vastness of the ocean can completely swallow all traces, leaving behind a legacy of heroism, mystery, and unending fascination. Then there is the strange and chilling case of the British South American Airways BSAA Avro-Lancastrian airliner named Stardust. This aircraft vanished without a trace in August 1947 while flying a route over the treacherous Andes Mountains from Buenos Aires, Argentina to Santiago, Chile. The last communication received from Stardust was a Morse code message picked up faintly by a radio operator in Santiago. The message was puzzling, and it ended abruptly with the cryptic, almost nonsensical word, Stendek. The meaning of Stendek has been debated by aviation historians and cryptographers for decades, with no universally accepted interpretation. For over 50 long years, the disappearance of Stardust was a complete mystery, another entry in the sorrowful ledger of lost aircraft. Then, in the late 1990s, almost 53 years after it vanished, a group of Argentinian mountaineers, climbing high on Mount Tupungato, a massive Andean peak, stumbled upon fragments of wreckage, including an engine and twisted pieces of metal. Subsequent investigations and analysis of the crash site suggested that Stardust had likely flown into a steep snowfield near the mountain's summit, possibly due to unexpectedly strong jet stream winds pushing it off course in cloudy conditions. The impact likely triggered an avalanche, which then completely buried the aircraft and its occupants in snow and ice. This natural entombment preserved the wreckage remarkably well, until decades later, The slow movement of the glacier carried fragments down to lower, more accessible elevations, where they were finally discovered. The story of Stardust is a poignant reminder that aviation mysteries can sometimes take decades, even generations, to yield even partial answers, often through sheer chance discovery in remote, high-altitude and deeply inhospitable terrain. An environment that, in its own way, is as challenging and concealing as the deep southern Indian Ocean. More recently, and perhaps more technologically comparable to MH370 in terms of the sophistication of the aircraft involved and the deep ocean environment of its loss, is the tragedy of Air France Flight 447. In June 2009, an Airbus A330 aircraft flying a night route from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to Paris, France, encountered severe weather over the equatorial Atlantic Ocean. It stalled aerodynamically and crashed into the sea, tragically killing all 220 passengers and crew on board. Initially, the precise cause of the crash was a mystery. Some floating debris and bodies were found relatively quickly in the days following the disappearance, confirming the catastrophic nature of the event. However, the crucial black boxes, the flight data recorder, FDR, and the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, which held the vital information about the aircraft's final moments and the crew's actions, lay silently on the seabed at a depth of nearly 4,000 meters, about 13,000 feet. It took almost 2 years of incredibly challenging, technologically advanced and very expensive underwater search efforts before these recorders were finally located and recovered. Their data, once analysed, revealed a tragic sequence of events. Ice crystals had formed and temporarily blocked the aircraft's pitot tubes, which are external sensors that measure airspeed. This led to unreliable airspeed readings being displayed in the cockpit, which, in turn, caused the autopilot to disconnect. The flight crew, likely confused by the conflicting information and the sudden loss of automation in a high-stress situation at night in turbulence, responded in a way that tragically exacerbated the situation. They inadvertently pulled the aircraft into a sustained aerodynamic stall from which they never managed to recover, despite stall warnings sounding in the cockpit. The story of Air France 447, while utterly devastating, eventually provided a painful, technical and human closure. It clearly demonstrated how a complex interplay of seemingly minor technical malfunctions, the iced-up pitot tubes, combined with unexpected human factors and challenging environmental conditions, could lead to a catastrophic outcome, even on a highly modern, sophisticated and automated aircraft. And it also powerfully demonstrated that, even in the deepest, darkest parts of the vast ocean, definitive answers can sometimes be retrieved, though the effort, the persistence and the cost required are often immense. These historical echoes, Amelia Earhart's enduring Pacific mystery that still captures the public imagination, Stardust's cryptic Andean vanishing and its remarkably late partial discovery, and Air France 447's deep Atlantic loss, followed by its eventual hard-won technical explanation, each resonate in their own unique and poignant way with the ongoing narrative of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. They collectively show us that some aviation mysteries remain stubbornly open, becoming woven into the fabric of folklore and enduring speculation, while others, sometimes after many decades of silence, eventually yield their secrets to relentless human persistence, advancements in technology, or sometimes, as with Stardust, to sheer, unexpected luck. They help to contextualize MH370 not as an entirely unprecedented, unique event in the long human endeavor of flight, but as another profoundly sorrowful and deeply perplexing chapter in our ongoing history of grappling with the unforgiving power of nature, the inherent risks involved in pushing the boundaries of exploration, and the deep human need to understand what happens when our creations and the precious lives they carry are lost to the great unknown. The soft, slightly irregular ticking of multiple old clocks seems to sound in our minds now, some faster, some slower. Perhaps the distant, resonant chime of a grandfather clock marking a forgotten hour. Then, one by one, these diverse tickings gradually fade, slowing down until only a single, slower, more deliberate tick remains, measuring the present moment, and then that too fades into a profound and thoughtful silence. And so, dear listener, after our long and gentle journey through the known facts, the intensive search efforts, the carefully considered plausible theories, the more speculative wilder notions, and the historical echoes that resonate from the past, we arrive at a quieter, more reflective place. We find ourselves standing before the profound and for many deeply unsettling reality of the great unknown. The mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, despite all the years, all the expertise, all the resources poured into solving it, persists. It remains a vast, shadowed question mark, hanging silently over the deep, remote waters of the southern Indian Ocean, a constant reminder of what we do not yet understand. How do we as human beings, individually and collectively, learn to live with such profound uncertainty, especially when that uncertainty is so intrinsically, heartbreakingly tied to such deep and widespread loss, to so many unanswered questions from so many grieving hearts? Part of the human story, perhaps a very fundamental and defining part of it, is our continuous, unavoidable encounter with the unknown. It has been with us since our earliest beginnings. Imagine the first humans, gazing up at the myriad stars scattered across the night sky, wondering about their nature, their distance, their meaning. Or early navigators, venturing out onto uncharted seas, facing the terrifying possibility of sailing off the edge of a flat world. Think of scientists today, grappling with the deepest mysteries of consciousness, the enigmatic nature of dark matter and dark energy that make up most of our universe, or the precise origins of life itself. Our entire existence, our progress, our philosophies, our art, all are threaded through with questions that may not have immediate answers, or perhaps questions that may never find complete, definitive answers within our individual lifetimes, or even within the span of many generations. To live with the unknown is, in many ways, to accept a fundamental aspect of the human condition. It is to acknowledge that our knowledge, however vast it may seem, is like a small, brightly lit island in an immense ocean of what we do not yet know. We can strive, with all our ingenuity, with all our passion, with all our technology, to expand that island of knowledge, to push back the shores of darkness. And indeed, humanity has been remarkably successful in doing so over the centuries. But the ocean always remains vast and deep. And sometimes an event like the disappearance of MH370 reminds us, with a stark and humbling clarity, just how immense that ocean of the unknown truly is, and how, despite all our advancements, we are still vulnerable. Still sometimes faced with mysteries that defy our immediate comprehension and our best efforts to solve them. There can be a strange, perhaps unexpected kind of peace to be found in acknowledging this. Not a peace of resignation or of giving up the search for answers where answers might still be found, but a peace that comes from accepting the limits of our current understanding, from learning to be comfortable with ambiguity, from recognizing that not all stories have neat, timely conclusions. It's like tending a single, clear candle flame in a vast, dark room. That small flame, representing our knowledge, our efforts, our hope, is precious. It pushes back the darkness in its immediate vicinity. It provides warmth and a point of focus. But it does not, and perhaps cannot, ever entirely erase the immensity of the darkness that surrounds it. And yet, we cherish that flame. We protect it. We use its light to see what we can. Living with the unknown is like learning to navigate by the light of that one small candle, appreciating its glow while also respecting the profound mystery of the shadows that lie beyond its reach. It means finding a way to carry the questions, the uncertainties, sometimes even the sorrows, with a sense of gentle patience, with an open heart, and with a quiet hope that perhaps, one day, more light may come, whether through discovery, through insight, or simply through the slow healing that time can sometimes bring, even to the deepest wounds of not knowing. And in that acceptance, in that gentle holding of the mystery, we can perhaps find a different kind of closure. Not the closure of solved equations or recovered wreckage, but the closure of a heart that has found a way to be at peace with the questions themselves. And so, dear listener, we arrive at the soft, quiet end of our shared journey tonight, or perhaps just another gentle pause in the vast, looping ocean of time and thought. We've wandered together through the early morning departure from Kuala Lumpur, traced the faint electronic whispers of satellite pings across the Indian Ocean, considered the theories, both grounded and reaching, that have sought to explain the inexplicable, and we've touched upon the deep human need to find meaning even in the most profound silence. We've acknowledged the immense scale of the search, the vastness of the ocean, and the enduring nature of this particular poignant mystery. And now, here you are, a little further along your own quiet timeline than when we first began. Was it mere minutes that slipped by? Or did the flow of these words, these thoughts, stretch and shrink in that peculiar way it so often does when the mind begins to soften, to ease its grip, to prepare for the gentle currents of sleep? So let me ask you once more, as softly and as gently as I did at the very beginning of our time together, where are you listening from tonight, in your own particular corner of this wide sleeping world? And what time, what gentle hour does your own clock now show? It's a funny thing, isn't it? After all this exploration of a moment lost in time, of a journey without a known end, we still find ourselves anchored by these small, familiar markers. A glowing number on a bedside screen, the profound hush of the late evening, or perhaps the first hints of dawn, that quiet, pervasive feeling of the day winding down, or a new one waiting just beyond the horizon, breath by breath. If you've found any measure of calm in this quiet expedition tonight, if the shared wondering about this deep mystery has paradoxically brought you a sense of peace, or if these words have perhaps helped your thoughts to drift gently towards the welcoming shores of your own dreams, then I would be ever so grateful if you feel inclined to perhaps give this video a gentle like. And if you'd wish to join me for more such quiet journeys in the future, maybe consider subscribing to this little sleepy space. It truly helps this small corner of calm to reach others who might also be in need of a peaceful pause, a gentle companion in the night. Time, as we know, can be such a slippery, strange, and elusive thing, and the story of MH370 is a stark reminder of that. But right now, here in this quiet, shared moment, it's just you, this voice, and perhaps the slow, deepening rhythm of your own restful breathing. Sleep well, dear midnight detective. Sleep deeply. May your night be peaceful and your dreams be kind. And may the tide of the night carry you softly until the light of a new day or the quiet continuation of your rest finds you. Good night.